Good morning, everyone. Okay, so I don't see a lot of coffee in front of people, so I'm hoping that means that you all drank it beforehand. Okay, I'm also not hearing a lot of laughing, so it means maybe that the coffee has not kicked in yet, but we are going to have an engaging 2 days of training where we have a lot of great information that's going to be going over, a lot of lessons learned, best practices, and the real intent of this is to be able to set you all up for success better than you came in today when it comes to disaster preparedness, planning, and understanding what that looks like for you and your PHA. So with that being said, my name is Brittany Kelly. I will be your moderator and facilitator and very bad comedian for the next 2 days. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Felicia.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Good to see all the smiling faces. So I am Felicia Gaither. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Field Operations. And so what that means for in public and Indian housing, and what that means is this great field office team that you work with are under my portfolio. So we have all 44 field offices that we oversee. And so I'm excited to be in Seattle again. Good to see some of the folks at the local level doing this work that we do. And so definitely thankful for Janice King Dunbar and her leadership and the field office team, as well as our vendors, Do-It Associates, and the other partners in the room today for us being here to talk about disaster readiness, response, and recovery. Because what we know is the families we serve really are hardest impact when something happens in the community. But before we get started, I do want to know, who am I talking to? And then I'll do some remarks and I'll turn it over to Janice. But good to know who's in the room because, again, you are the important people that do this work. So we will start here with, we'll start with the panel and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll go around just so we can know who's here. So starting with Don.
Hi, my name is Ron Lebsock. I'm with Do-It Associates.
Ron.
Prior to me coming to Do-It Associates, I had 30 years at the Columbus Housing Authority in Columbus, Ohio. I split my career there not quite in half, but my first 20 years I was the CIO over all things IT, working with departments to do amazing things in delivery of services to our residents. My last 10 years I took over as Senior Vice President over Housing Choice Voucher Program, oversaw that program, and we did a RAD conversion portfolio-wide. Ended up having oversight of the public housing program simultaneously while we started that initiative and then rolled it back. So have been on both sides of the fence and have learned lots from being on that side of it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Harstad, and I'm with Washington State Emergency Management Division. I am the Recovery Section Manager for EMD, and formerly had mitigation and work a lot with the resilience side of our agency. I also work as the Deputy State Coordinating Officer for our federally declared disasters. Currently have 2 in our joint field office, but we've had as much as 8 at one time in the last few years with the multiple disasters of the state. So a lot of those affect people in your communities. So bear with me as we do this week, because I will put out acronyms that you don't understand, so I will try to spell those out, but also you will have acronyms I have no idea what they are. So hopefully educate me this week as well on what you guys do, and hopefully find a nexus of where our 2 programs can help each other out.
Very good. My name is Ed Mayer. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of the County of Butte in Northern California. It's great to see all my brothers and sisters here from the Northwest. We rarely get to mix it up. My background, I started as an architect in 1980. I've been in the housing business for 30 years now, and I've been in the, director of the Missoula Housing Authority for 10 years, director of the Housing Authority in Butte for 15 years. I sit on the NARO, BECT, and LegNet committees.
Very good.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Janice King Dunbar. I'm the director of the Seattle Field Office here in Seattle.
Good morning. My name is Kenton Bryan. I serve as president of the Northwest Insurance Council. We're a nonprofit insurer-supported organization that provides information about home, auto, and business insurance to consumers, news media folks, and public policymakers in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Our members are large national writers of insurance in these areas. There are also some local regional companies. I don't think any of our members write in this particular space because it's largely a specialty lines market, non-admitted market, which I can talk more about a little later. But hopefully I can help provide some information about what's going on in the insurance market nationally and here in the Northwest, and then learn a lot from you all about the kind of issues you're facing with insurance and other issues as we work through today and tomorrow. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Mr. Tombar, I'm just Fred. Last name is Tombar. I am with the Dew and Associates team, but formerly with HUD for 13 years in and out, including serving as a senior advisor to Secretary Sean Donovan for disaster recovery. Prior to that, a deputy assistant secretary in multifamily housing. But I also worked as the executive director of the Louisiana Housing Corporation, where we were responsible for the Louisiana Housing Authority and our voucher program. It's good to be with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So again, good morning. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. Wow, there's a lot of good representation of various positions, right, and levels of responsibility in the room, online, and so I definitely appreciate the fact that you are here to participate in this training. Being prepared to respond for the next disaster or emergency is very important. With climate change, with global warming, we no longer say, well, that won't happen here. We know that that can happen, whatever that is, right? What do you define that as? Is it an earthquake? Is it a wildfire? Is it a flood or tornado? We know that we need to be prepared and ready to respond. So this training is really designed to help in that manner. It's designed for you to take back information that will help you to put strategies in place so that you know and understand if you're on first, who your local community emergency management teams are. Here at HUD, we often get that phone call. People always want to know when the hurricane hits in Louisiana or when the flood hits in California or the wildfires hit in the state of Washington. Well, what's HUD going to do? We're like, what? We help the PHA, right? We want to help. So that is why this type of training is critically important, because we want you to know when you're on first. We want you to know who your partners are in your local communities. There have been so many times where I've been on the phone with my team and they're working with executive directors, they're working with leaders at a PHA, and the leader is saying, well, I don't know. Am I supposed to help people to evacuate? How do we do this? And so this training is really set up to give you those tools, to give you those resources. We spent a lot of time at HUD making sure that you have resources. We, a couple of years, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we updated our readiness, response, and recovery guidance. We want you to look at those materials. We want you to take information from here. And the way that these trainings are designed and our materials are designed, you probably could just cut and paste a lot of things, right? So the time is making the time to prepare and be ready. That's the time. And it will save you, it will save your community, it will save the families you serve in so many ways. Because we know that when our families are impacted by a disaster, the ones that we serve, they lose more of everything, because they already start with just a little bit. So by your being prepared, by your being in this space, ready to share, ready to listen, to learn, and really ask any question. There's time set up and designed on this agenda to allow for you to actually have time to start writing some of your plans. You have many partners in this room, and there's sometimes some aha moments. So maybe that doesn't happen in your community, but maybe there's something you can do, like having in your annual plan that you will give preference to individuals that are impacted by a disaster. That's how you help if that doesn't hit you. So I'm excited to be here, excited to have us prepare you to respond, because what we know is it's taking communities longer and longer to recover from incidences. And so the more you are prepared and able to respond, the more likely you can reduce the amount of time it takes to recover from an incident. And so again, my team is here to support. You all work very well, I know, and know your field office staff. But if you don't, if you heard somebody say they work for PIH and you didn't know that, and you think they should be serving you, please take a moment to go up to them, to get a contact name, to get more information. Just because this training is 2 days, that does not mean our support ends in 2 days, okay? So please do just be open to learning, to listening, and staying engaged. It's important because you never know where that nugget is going to come from. I already, the gentleman at the end of the table is going to talk about insurance. We know that across this country, insurance premiums are going up. We have underinsured properties. That means that's going to hit your area harder, right? If there is a that. I keep calling it a that because we don't know what it will be, right? But we want to make sure that we support you and help you through that. You've got some great subject matter experts who've been around, who know this work. I'm excited to see the partners at this table. And you're going to hear from your peers who have had to deal with catastrophic events that they never thought would happen in their communities. So I'll be quiet, turn it over to Janice, let her give some opening remarks. But again, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be ready.
Right.
Janice.
Thank you, Felicia. Well, good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you to all of our partners, and thank you to all of our PHAs for attending today. And also thank you, Felicia, for crisscrossing the United States to be here at the tip in the Pacific Northwest. The weather has held up for you. And just want to say we appreciate your steadfast leadership and your encouraging words this morning. So thank you. We're finally here, you guys, and I just want to say thank you for being here. And thank you for your patience. We've had to reschedule twice. But the reason why we rescheduled is because we wanted to have a full room, right? We wanted everyone to be here to be here. The first was we had scheduled it right in the middle of the holidays, so people couldn't be here across the pass. Like you, Nancy, you wasn't able to be here. And then we also had put it on dates that kind of collided with the Pacific Northwest Conference. And so we rescheduled it because we wanted a full room and we wanted everyone to be here to benefit from this very important training. So again, thank you for your patience, and we really appreciate you being here. Also, I just want to say a little bit about the fact that in all of my communications about this training, I was pleading for your attendance in this event as I continue to emphasize the importance of this training, because I myself, as a leader, has had over the last couple of years been able to lead through natural disasters. And we all know that all of us here in the Pacific Northwest and all of our states have either, we're facing windstorms, we have the fires that we've had to experience in Oregon, as well as the earthquake in Anchorage. So we are a region that have been affected by disasters over the last couple of years. So it is timely and it's important for us. But also as a leader, I've had the opportunity to lead through a couple disasters over the last couple of years, and I know how important it is. I had to lead through the flood in Galena, Alaska in 2013. I had the opportunity of leading the Oso, Washington landslide that happened in 2014. I also was leading through the Anchorage, Alaska earthquake in 2018. And although this is not a natural disaster, we had an active shooter in this building in 2017, and I had to lead through that as well. So I know that it is so important for you to plan and have those plans in place, even though sometimes when those disasters happen, you may not necessarily implement those plans exactly, but it's always good to have those plans in place. And I know as a leader through all of those disasters and all of those events that I've led through, it is so important to have the plan. So that's why you had all those pleading emails from me, right? Because I know exactly what it is to make sure that you have plans in place and be able to plan for disasters and be able to coach your staff through it. Not only you, your staff, your community, because as leaders, you're going to be at the very front of coaching people through it. And I've had the opportunity of having to do that from, when we had the earthquake in Anchorage. We had plans in place, but we didn't think about the fact that, nothing was going to be operating there. So we had staff that was literally walking through the streets because they couldn't do anything. So we had to be like, oh, okay, we got to do this. Or we got to call people. So you have to kind of improvise. And so just knowing from all the things I've had to respond to as a leader in disasters is really important. So thank you for heeding my plea and being here both virtually and in person. It's really important for us to have this conversation today. Again, before I close, I want to acknowledge our staff. You heard back in the back of the room, we have several of our local field office staff here. Again, a lot of us haven't been able to connect over the years. I have been having my staff get out to a lot and visit you guys, but if you have not connected, I have asked staff to connect with you, go to lunch, connect, have conversations, because it's all about us collaborating and being in partnership, because that is what's going to get us through any disaster, any of the changes that we know that are coming up. So if you haven't met, we have a lot of new staff, so connect. Be in conversation, be in fellowship, because that is what it's going to take for us to move forward as a unit in the next couple years. So before I also close, I do want to just highlight one of my staff members who have been planning through all of the rescheduling and has been doing all the logistics. Her name is Stephanie Foe. So Stephanie, if you can stand up, I just want to acknowledge all of your coordination. Thank you. She greeted most of you guys downstairs when you came through security, but she's been with the ebbs and flow of all the changes we've had to make, and so I just want to acknowledge her and thank her for all her coordination. With that, I would just say thank you again for everything that you do for our communities, our children and families, and we are here in partnership with each and every one of you, and I'm looking forward for you to be able to maximize the benefit from this training the next 2 days. And again, as Felicia said, we're going to be here not just for these 2 days, but for in moving it forward in the future. So we're always here to coordinate and be that support for you guys. So thank you again for being here, near and far, from Anchorage all the way from over across the mountains, and everybody that's also on the virtual. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we look forward to connecting with you over the next 2 days. Thank you.
And let me just say, there's some folks virtually that I'd be remiss if I did not also thank them. So I think Rachel McCauley may be on the line, Eric Chambers, Trinessa Sidney, and the team that also works very closely with Do and Associates to make sure that we're able to put these trainings on across the country. So thank you, team back there, and also thank you again to the Seattle team and to Do Associates. So enjoy your days.
Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia.
Okay, so with that being said, again, my name is Brittany Kelly. Feel free to ask any questions. We would love this to be open dialogue. While I am the facilitator and I am okay at public speaking, I feel awkward up here, but I feel a lot more awkward if there's no engagement. And so then I'm happy to make eye contact and ask you what your opinions are, feedback. So the more you're engaged, the better this goes, the more fun we're gonna have in the next couple days. We had some nice colleagues that provided some donuts and coffee up here if you need sugar and or caffeine. Again, there's restrooms out near the elevators where you came in. This is a recorded session, but it's so that we can be able to share this with others in the Pacific Northwest that may have not been able to attend today. So just so you are aware, it is recorded, and also so that we have our Zoom participants. For those that are online, if you would like to drop any questions or comments in the chat, we will be checking that, or feel free to raise your hand virtually and we will try and be able to open it up for any additional questions. Finally, I want to talk about the disaster readiness plan. So this was provided to you virtually. We have a couple copies if anyone would like one of these, if you were not able to print it. This is exactly what Felicia was talking about, that the HUD team put together in coordination with multiple partners to be able to get you started with your planning. What you will notice about the readiness plan is it kind of follows the next 2 days. We're going to start with talking about some information and disaster profiles. We're going to kind of go into what it looks like for that disaster readiness and that risk assessment of vulnerabilities that you may or may not face. So that way, when you can get into the response and what is the resources and logistics there, and closing out with recovery. So this is a great thing to take notes in. We can provide another virtual copy later if you would like to type it up to be able to edit it at any point. It also has other disaster profiles, which may or may not be helpful in some of your referencing. And then in the back, there are some blank note pages if you need them as well, if you just want to be able to start taking notes. With that being said, I think this covers most of the housekeeping and just awareness of what we have. Again, we will have a break a little bit later this morning. We found it very helpful for some of the other trainings. Some of the PHAs just ordered in pizza or lunch so that you could catch up with colleagues and have that fellowship and have that conversation. Please feel free to do that for lunch. Also, we're very fortunate that we're downtown, so there are a lot of options within a couple feet away. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and move on to the disaster introductions for wildfires and earthquakes.
So I guess it is working. There it goes.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's always on, so I never know. So this is where I talk about, so we're going to talk about some disaster profile. So the slides of which we'll show here are developed by our hazards and analysis team. So they specifically, a lot will be focused on earthquake and tsunami. So I know the earthquake is part of your profile here, but in my business, I can't talk about one without the other. So, I mean, 'cause specifically we have a lot of coastal communities, and a lot of our partners from Oregon and Alaska have the same concerns in your coastal communities. So we'll talk a little bit about both. I hope we have some cool videos in here. Hopefully they play. If not, we can kind of talk through them. But definitely at the end or throughout if you have specific questions. This is focused on Washington State primarily. So some of our out-of-state partners, very similar stuff, but you should hopefully have access to these as well with your local EMs. So next slide. So I'm going to follow along here. So I'll go through some of this because the slides are a preset slide deck, so it kind of covers a lot of stuff. So I'll go through some of the slides quickly. So this one, as you all understand, this is kind of how an earthquake works. Washington has the second highest earthquake risk in the U.S. I mean, everyone talks about California, and it is primarily, they have a lot of fault lines down there, but we are the second in the U.S. So there's a lot of concerns here, though we don't get a lot of earthquakes. The last major one we had was the Nisqually earthquake in 2001, which did over $34 million damage. So that in the slides here. Today, that's probably twice that, or maybe 3 times that in damages. So it's a big concern about us. And then when it happens, because we're not prepared, a lot of people aren't going to be prepared. So we'll touch on that at different points. So next slide. So basic stuff, what to expect. I mean, you guys kind of probably all have the shakeout drills. I know we do it every year here in the state on October 1st. So a lot of our Washington State partners know that shakeout drill. And these are the basics you need to get with all your residents. Hey, go over some basics. They understand, make sure they can get to where they're safe. So next slide. So a lot of this is to show some of the kind of damages you can see, and we'll talk about landslides that are associated with earthquakes and not here a little later. And you can see some of the liquefaction and other issues that we have post-fire. Next slide. So some good photos here of different earthquake-caused issues across the globe. Some of these photos are as many from Washington as we can find, but there are some other from other locations. So you can see kind of the scope of damage. Next slide. And next. Oh, okay. Yeah, right there. Sorry. I'm not sure where you're at. I'll just follow. I'll just stay up there, I guess. That works. So you can see here, and we'll talk about a little bit about unreinforced masonry and for your communities, is looking at the structure of your buildings. You know what I mean? Not necessarily the structure of the building, but the structure of the buildings around where you have people placed. Because if you have an apartment complex down the block, but this building collapses or next door or right in front, it's going to cause issues. Some locations, based on how the masonry is reinforced, whole fronts of buildings will fall off. So it's actually sometimes safer to be in the building in the earthquake or like in the middle of a field because the streets become like a litter box. Next slide. A couple other, as we talk about, the videos did play. So you can see here the shaking and the buildings just collapsing. So that's a concern. Even if your buildings are safe, you have to assess the areas around where you have people placed because there could be serious concerns in the environment. So next slide. So we talk a little bit about landslides and their effect on earthquakes, where we talk about the Oso landslide on occasion, but landslides are simply caused by earthquakes, but also other environmental factors. We get hundreds of landslides across the state every year. Most of them are minor ones, blocking roads or other access, but some of them are more serious. We've had several in the last year on I-5, right there by the Columbia River, that has blocked major rail traffic across that area. So it's cut off a lot of rail supply. We'll talk about supply routes as we go, so that could affect your populations as well. Next slide. So some of the good videos here. So fire's a thing. We'll talk about wildfires, and I'll let my California counterparts talk a bit more about the Paradise Fire specifically. But as you see, I'm still surprised the one on the right, it's fully surrounded by water, but it is burning down. So how do you claim that on insurance? So liquefaction is a thing. You'll see the videos of the sinkholes on YouTube and other places like that. But in an earthquake, it's tenfold that. So like whole buildings can sink down. We saw a lot of that in San Francisco in the earthquake in the 90s. Whole buildings just sunk down like a story or two into the ground. And so that has happened. You've got to look at the soil in the areas you're in and be prepared for it. Next slide. So the big one, a lot of people probably heard about the Cascadia subduction zone. So this is the big one we're preparing for. A couple of the next slides go over that. But we're talking an earthquake at magnitude of 9.2. And that's historically, so around that point. And that's just the primary shock. There'll be probably multiple shock waves after that. In level, the aftershocks in 6, 7 magnitude earthquakes after the initial. So it'll be a pretty bad day for us across, you can see most of the Pacific Northwest. Okay, next slide. So you can see this is how we say, hey, we're in our zone across the EM, hey, we're in our zone for our next Cascadia subduction zone. This is our evidence here. So the big red ones are those kind of major earthquakes. You see how they kind of march along, and we're kind of in that zone. They say it's anywhere from 300 to 800 years. We're about 375, I think. The last somebody's math, something like that. So we're in that 300 to 500 year zone. So any day could be the day. We could be sitting here today, and what do we do? So the big thing with that too is the shaking will go on for about 5 minutes, is our estimates. So that's good to get talk about your people. And then that's the worst kind of case scenario, and that's what we plan for as state emergency management. That's kind of our worst case disaster scenario. We do get a lot of disasters every year, floods, bad storms, wildfires, but this is the big one. So this is the one we plan for and really work all of our plans to support a major activation like this, because this will affect primarily everything from the Cascade Mountain Ranges west will be seriously affected. So next slide. Not to be Debbie Downer first thing in the morning. And if there's a Debbie in the room, I apologize. See, I'm helping you out with the comic relief there. So you can see, talk about the different subduction zone areas in our threat maps. You see a lot of it's the coastal area, but it affects pretty much everything. Will have major effects, everything west of the mountains. So next slide. Next slide. So this is kind of a map of what we talk about, like infrastructure impact. So this slide, the next one, we'll talk about that. Where all the airports will be cracked and broken, railroads will be damaged, roads will be damaged. So it's going to be hard to get some people in and out and supplies in and out. So those are some considering factors to talk about some of the major effects of a major earthquake. Next slide. Talk about bridges, their ages, their rating. So we have a lot of water in this state, and I think across the Northwest, so a lot of bridges. I mean, I drove up here from Olympia, and I would estimate I passed probably 40 on the way up here this morning. Overpasses or bridges, and all of those be it damaged or being destroyed or collapsed or unsafe. So talking about just me coming up from the south, that could be a 3-day venture. So next slide. So we talk about tsunami. So we talk about earthquake, we got to talk about tsunamis. And so we understand, even if like an earthquake hits primarily on land, but it's close enough to the water and it's powerful enough, it can produce waves. They could be small waves, they could be major waves. And so with like a subduction zone, that fault line's off the coast. So we really worry about on that earthquake that goes off, we'll have major tsunamis directly after that. So you can see here the subduction zone and the tsunami effects. So, and come on, there he goes. Shake, there he goes. Good little graphic for you. So everybody remember the last major tsunami in the world? We talked about the South Pacific, and the Philippines, and Japan, and so you just see all the impacts of those earthquakes offshore, nuclear power impacts, a lot of damage to infrastructure, hundreds of miles away from the actual source of the earthquake. If we talk about earthquakes, major earthquakes in Alaska can cause tsunami-type waves down here in Washington, and vice versa, and we'll talk about that at a later slide. So next slide, please. So you see here, we talk about timing. If it's right off the coast, if that subduction zone slip is right off the coast, we're about an hour lead time. Sometimes, depends on where it's at, it could be short. Like there's a major fault line directly right under our feet here, the Seattle fault line. Well, not directly, I think it's actually about a mile west. But there's another concern, so a major earthquake here in Seattle would cause damage, but this would be the start of tsunami waves that would roll out to our other locations in the Sound. So across the Sound would have major impacts from the tsunami as well. So next slide. So here's some videos of some far-off tsunami waves, just hitting ports and relocating all your ships. Hopefully everybody online can see this well as well. Okay, good. Next slide. The second video at the bottom, it's a little slower. Hard to see, but you can see the wave on the bottom kind of rolling in below, sweeping through the area. All right, next slide. So again, when water washes up on tsunamis, it causes a lot of other effects. So anything that you have, your trash, your gasoline, your oil in your shed, what do you keep in your garage, all now becomes debris in the water, and those chemicals mix in. So something that happens a lot with floods, we talk about, shouldn't ever go through flood water unless you have to. So, because there's a lot of toxins in the water that we have to worry about. Will affect the health and safety of the entire community if we don't address those early on as well. Next slide. So this is the cool graphic. So another thing with tsunami waves is like, physics. As a wave rolls in, the water then comes back out. So it becomes, as you see here, kind of this cascading multi-wave thing. So they'll have a wave of maybe 30 feet come through, and then another wave of 20 feet come through, and then another wave of 10. So it gets they start bouncing back around and affect a lot of the coast, all the way down to the bottom of the sound, pretty much. So that's a tidal wave that started offshore. It comes all the way to around the south. All right, next slide, please. All right, okay. Oh, we can skip. This is just to talk about like the time from a location to our anticipated height. 17 feet in certain areas, 40 feet, and different. So it could be very. So basically, a lot of it is look at your. These maps are available, and every jurisdiction should have if you're on a coast. Make sure you know your maps. Most of the tsunami inundations are mapped or marked, but as you're looking at your environment, also check your evacuation route. Hey, you might be evacuated from an area, and it goes through maybe a lowland. So look at those for your communities. Next slide, please. And this was California 2011. Next, I think it'll pull the other one. Hopefully you didn't want seafood this night. All right, next slide. So real quickly, again, especially if you're traveling to a lot of people, summertime, hey, I'm gonna go out to the beach. If you hear a siren go off, start moving. So I tell people that. So, and across the nation, actually across the world, there's not a lot of tsunami evacuation. Like people like, here's the road, but in certain communities, we'll slow here to another slide. They're not geographic space. So we're starting an initiative within the state to do tsunami evacuation towers, vertical evacuation towers. We have the first 2 in the nation here in the state. One was built as part of a school project. They were rebuilding their gym, like we need tsunami protection for our students. And they put it on top of the gym when they rebuilt the gym, which is a great activity and something we're trying to encourage a lot of jurisdictions to look at is how can you look at your other projects and look to improve or add on to improve different hazard mitigation activities. So next slide. This is one, Port Angeles is one example. You talk about the time. Hey, if you're out on the beach adventuring, what is the time that's going to take you to get away? So if you're out on the far peninsula, 120 minutes. And that's standard if you're walking on foot because you're not going to be able to drive because everybody's going to be going out at the same time. So we're really looking at where your properties were located and the evacuation time. Because a lot of the people you serve aren't really mobile. Like I can get up with my kids and probably run a good distance sometime, but not all my family members are coming with me if we're running, so something to consider and look at that for planning factors. Next slide. So this is my one wildfire. Didn't want to take it too much. So for a lot of you and a lot of the counties that I see in the red are in this room, so you know the danger of wildfire. In the state, in the Spokane wildfires, the Great Oregon Road fire, we had 447 damaged homes out of that fire. 362 were completely destroyed. So as you know, as we'll talk about, when a fire comes through, there's not a like, oh, it flooded and I can do a little bit of muck and gut and we can get people back in there. There's nothing left. And we're still dealing right now, working with the local jurisdictions to clean up the debris from that and people to rebuild. and resettle. So there's still a lot of work to do in that, but there's really removes a lot of options when we're talking about disaster resettlement or rehousing, as we just lost complete options. We did a lot. There's a lot of good work in that. The locals, they're building container box living systems for their residents to drop on their property so they can live out of something on their property as they rebuild. But that's for people who own a property or have a place to go. So for a lot of your population, they don't have that option. So what are other options to house them? And then again, if this hit an area that housed a lot of your people, we've got to relocate, at least for temporarily, 360 some families. It's a lot to do over one single event. So luckily we didn't have a lot of public housing authority properties affected on this fire, but winds would have, if the winds had not shifted to the south, it would have pushed into Spokane proper. That would have been a lot different day. But that was so you can see kind of our fire threat map. But even if you're on the west side, I say don't sit on your laurels, because we had fires just north of here the summer before last, and that fire burned for about 2 months. Slow burn, and because a lot of the timber and a lot of the green space last year haven't burned in 100+ years, 50+, 100+ years. So a lot of foliage, a lot of dead growth, a lot of fuels, as we call it. So these fires get hot and they burn a long time. And at that point, it's all about the wind, and if they're going to be nice to us that day. We'll see how these fires move. And that is all I have, and I will turn it over to somebody else.
Thank you, Joel. So just a couple of things I would love to make sure that we're taking away from this, working with Joel, being part of the State Office of Emergency Management, is first, one of the phrases that you'll hear in the emergency management realm is federally funded, state managed, locally executed. And the reason that's very important is because what you heard from Janice and from Felicia is they're here to give you the tools, to provide training, to give you the information, to support resources. But if something happens tomorrow, they're not going to be potentially best suited to be able to help you with that response effort right away. Similarly, at the state level, again, federally funded, because there's funding that potentially comes down if there's a presidentially declared disaster, and other resources. State manages a lot of those resources, but again, if you pick up the phone and call the state, Joel and his team may not be the best people to be able to help you in that incident when it comes to that response and short-term recovery. But what will help is being locally executed. So that's your preparedness, that's this planning. It's also reaching out to your county emergency management, understanding what planning they're doing at a more local, centralized area. We'll get more into this later as we continue training, but I want you to be thinking about that, because one of the things in your disaster readiness plan when it comes to your stakeholders and people you should be developing relationships with is some of your HUD team members. It is being aware that we have Joel and his very well-versed team when it comes to some of this and understanding what your state plan might look like, but what is your county doing? What is your city doing? Do they have an emergency management plan? Are they planning for different types of perils? I think that's very important as we're navigating this.
And so are you at the table when they're talking about their plans?
Yes.
So it's probably one of my shticks this next couple days is going to be having the conversations, building relationships, and being in the room, being an advocate for your piece of any plan or any program that they're pushing through.
Yes, that will be critical. Making sure that the people that you're also serving are involved when it comes to what does that evacuation look like and what does that sheltering look like are probably the two largest pieces of that. But at this time, I'm going to introduce Ed, who's going to go into our case study introduction. And so what we are doing is we are feathering in some case studies and experiences to learn best practices, learn what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do better next time.
Thanks, Brittany. Again, my name's Ed Mayer. I'm the director of the Housing Authority of the County of Butte in Northern California, and we have a lot in common. We manage properties, of course, we manage assets, we manage people, but we do it in an environment. Northern California is very similar to your environment. We're part of Ecotopia, and in Ecotopia here along the Pacific West Coast, we got the rim of fire that we're negotiating, and we also have floods, and we also have wildfires and other events. Joel, you did a really good job of supporting a fear-based existence. There's a lot to be afraid of out there. But putting fear aside, my message today is to give you a picture of what happened in Paradise, California in 2018, and actually in the couple years following. In one day, we had 14,000 houses burned to the ground. And when a house burns to the ground in today's world, it is an environmental disaster. You have to clean it up with environmental protocols. So we had 14,000 houses that had to be cleaned up. For starters, we had 35,000 people displaced in this disaster. And when you displace 35,000 people in a county that only has 225,000 people to start, it's a disaster. And is there any planning for this kind of disaster? In our conversations leading up to this seminar today, or this work today, I'm kind of the rebel guy. We're housing authorities. We're out there doing noble work every day. We confront disasters every day, all day long. This is what we do. We eat disasters for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So when a giant disaster hits, it's just kind of part of the same gig we walk into every day, only a little bigger. So I always emphasize resilience. How do you build a culture of resilience, both in your agency and in your community? But we'll get into that a little bit later. So the Paradise disaster, we displaced 35,000 people. We had 315 voucher holders displaced from the disaster. We didn't know what to do with them. 3 of them died in the fire. My own home was in the burn scar, so I woke up, I was immediately displaced. We were evacuated. I didn't get to know whether I had a home for about a week, and I wasn't allowed to return to my home for about 3 weeks. So I was living in a friend's house with a pair of pants and a shirt to go to work on. My wife and I went down to the thrift store, bought some dishes. This is how we made do, all the while every day showing up for work. I had a number of employees who had had their homes burned down in the disaster. We had 38 employees. 6 of them lost their own homes, so they were immediately not available. All 6 of them had to leave the jurisdiction because there was no housing. And the real issue with wildfire disaster, there's 2 issues. One, as Joel mentioned, we live in areas in the West here that haven't been burned off, and I'll just say for 100 years. You look at Butte County in California, we're at the northern end of the gold mining district that stretches from Sacramento, the 49er era. So back in 1850s up through the turn of the century, that part of California was environmentally wasted. They blew apart every stream, every river looking for gold. But what it really did was disrupt the background lifestyle. Prior to the arrival of the gold miners, the area was occupied by Native Americans who proactively burned off the mountains on a regular basis for 2 reasons. One was to remove the threat of really violent fires, but 2 is to provide grass feed for the ungulates, for the deer. The deer can't feed on hillsides covered in brush. So anyways, what we ended up with in 2018 were the foothills of the Sierras that hadn't been burned off in over 100 years. Thick, just thick. And the reason this is important is because there's a whole lot of other places in California that are just like this. Grass Valley, just south of us, north of us, Cohasset, all up and down the chain. And I look in Oregon and Washington, you have the same situation. We're dealing with transitions between large agrarian farm areas up into the foothills, and when it gets dry and it doesn't rain, and in Butte County we have really a 2-season climate. Once it stops raining about now in May, we won't see a cloud again until October or November. So by the time you get to October or November, as I say, things are so dry you could start a fire by spitting. And so people begin to walk real softly. You can drive a car across a field and heat from your exhaust will set the field on fire. So it's that combustible. And you're sitting there praying for rain. Well, in 2018, we didn't get rain, we didn't get rain, we didn't get rain. And on the 8th of November, we had this wildfire. Heavy winds, low humidity, a fitting on a PG&E power line tower that was 60 years old. It had been slated for replacement for over 40 years. It failed, and the power line fell into the brush down in the upper Feather River Canyon. And we had 50-mile-an-hour winds blowing that day. It was a perfect shot. If you had tried to burn down the town of Paradise, you could not have done a better job. That fire started in a place. There was no escape. There was no room to move. There was no time. And there were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of takeaways. What I want to do is just paint this picture, this horrifying picture, where you don't have control of staff, you don't have control of your community. It is a disaster, utter meltdown. And so there are ways we worked out of this. We were very resilient. There's some really cool things that came out of this. But the fact that we are all teed up for a whole lot more of this is really disconcerting. And I'm not sure there's a whole lot we can do with our present systems to really avoid it. So we're in a very awkward position. There are tools. I will tell you the tools for recovery are very, very limited. The destruction to our community, here we are 5 years later. The town of Paradise now has about 15% of what had been burned down built back, mostly manufactured housing and trailers. The people who had lived up in Paradise were low income, extremely low income. It was a haven for very low income elderly and disabled. Most of them did not find housing. They're homeless. They're homeless on the streets. They're homeless on the streets to this day. And the local jurisdictions have taken umbrage to the fact that they're having to manage some other jurisdictions' displaced households. So these different cultures of different communities and how they work together in rural settings can be really either divisive or unifying, depending on the attitude of the local jurisdictions. So you're sitting here working in these large disasters with a lot of other jurisdictions. In our area, of course, the Paradise Fire was followed 2 years later by 2 more fires. We had the following year, the North Complex fires. We lost another 1,200 units. And the year after that, we had the Dixie Fire, the largest fire in the history of California. We lost another 600 units. So altogether, we lost 16,400 units in our area in 3 years. And the displaced populations is just the most horrendous, sad thing you've ever seen. These people have been disenfranchised. I was on the radio one evening talking about these displaced populations we're trying to work with. No place to put them. There's no housing in America. There's no housing in California, and I suspect it's the same way up north here. Your housing opportunity is a rare commodity. Where do you go find housing? So we had a lot of people displaced. They're still displaced to this day. With no real services provided for them. I was on the radio, like I say, talking, and I mentioned refugees. And the next day I got a call from a veteran who took umbrage at the fact I used the word refugees in reference to this population that was displaced. And he said, you know, refugees is a technical term. I've worked overseas, sir. And I said, yes, tell me about it. He said, refugees are people who don't have a government, who don't have a country. And I said, okay, I think that pretty well describes this population. These low-income households have been displaced. They have no resource, they have no recourse, and their government is not there for them. Neither the state government nor the federal government. They're still homeless today. These are refugees. We're going to see more and more climate refugees. This is one of the most insidious parts of what we do. If you think the homeless problem is terrible in your community now, wait till a disaster comes. And then it's just compounded and accentuated. I think I'll stop there, unless you have questions about what happened in this fire. It was horrendous. We're still digging out. We still consider ourselves in disaster recovery.
All right, so I do want to take a pause to ask for any questions, both for Joel or for Ed thus far. Any questions about specifically Washington, what the state does for Office of Emergency Management? Everyone's comfortable with?
I'll ask a question.
Thank you.
That's the good and bad. So Glenn, thank you for sharing. And as you explained, 16,000 units lost, right? We know those are human lives that are impacted by those 16,000 units. And we know how long it takes to build something in America, in communities that are already distressed. But the other thing that hit me was when you talked about you and your wife, right? You were displaced. You're then still showing up at work. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of planning you had done or lessons learned, right, as you move forward now, knowing that we all live in the same community, so my deputy may be impacted, my program manager may be impacted, my resident coordinator may be impacted, and I've got to be empathetic to their situation when we have hundreds of families that are also depending on us. What type of planning needs to go into that?
I'm grateful you asked that question because I'm a real rebel when it comes to planning. I'm trained as an architect and planner. I appreciate plans. I worked for years in city planning. But when it comes to disasters, I keep telling everybody, there is no way to plan for a disaster. That's why they call it a disaster. If it was planned for, it wouldn't be a disaster. You'd have your bases covered. No, this is seat of the pants stuff. And so what you're really looking at is building resiliency in your organization, in yourself, in your employees, and in your community. And when I say resiliency, it means your house just burned down, but you show up at work the next day because it's the right thing to do. And we're talking about, we're servants, we're public housing servants. We serve the public, and I know this, I know you in this room. We do incredible and beautiful work because we put our own stuff aside and serve others. And in a disaster, it's all the more important to do that. And so one of the beautiful things I saw in our agency, I didn't have employees calling and saying, I can't come in unless they didn't have a house. Everyone showed up to work. What can I do? And we just started pulling. We had a lot of support from our local HUD office, a regional office, which is delightful. We had help from HUD all over the land. One of the interesting takeaways, asides here, in terms of our networking, the Paradise Fire was so exciting that I believe we received a visit from every HUD official in America. And every time they would walk in the door with this celebrity or that celebrity, sorry, Fred, I would look at them and they'd say, tell me your story. I'd tell them the story. And then I'd look at them and I'd say, so did you bring any resources, money? So it ended up being a dog and pony show. I think a lot of HUD officials loved the show. I'm not sure what takeaways there were. But you know, these events attract a lot of attention, so you don't want to get distracted from the real mission at hand. And so we'll talk about the outfall here. There's a lot of takeaways because there was a lot of, how should I say, conflicting action, you know, trying to line up federal, state, and local resources by way of response was a dance in itself. Our first efforts, though, immediately after the disaster was, I need a place to stay that I can work from. I need to make sure my employees are okay and they're comfortable, and that we then work from there. So, but this idea of planning, you know, our agency in Butte County, in 2014, we were subject to the Oroville Dam disaster. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but the Oroville Dam is the largest, it's the tallest dam in America and the largest earth-filled dam at one point in the world. A lot of water behind that dam. Anyways, in 2014, we had some horrendous rains, and the spillway to the dam started to fail. And so the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, they opened up the emergency spillway, and that emergency spillway started to fail. When dams start to fail, it's not a pretty picture. They start to erode. And so the folks running the dam were hysterical. So we evacuated Oroville. Oroville was, if that dam had gone down, Sacramento would not be a city today. So we evacuated the community. When I started this business in 1989, how did I start it? I was hired by the Housing Authority of the County of Santa Cruz to set up a development department by way of disaster recovery. Earthquakes are nothing compared to a wildfire. Earthquakes, you might have some structural damage. Floods, like down in Watsonville, you might have some, you know, some mud, some muck up, some cleanup. You still have structures that survive. In a wildfire, everything goes, and there's no place to put anybody. We do not have in our country today the resiliency to be able to entertain 35,000 displaced people, at least not in a rural area.
If I could add something. First, a little bit more about my background. I have worked with communities around the country on disasters. In fact, I was in Paradise, not as a HUD official, but as a consultant for Cal OES and the governor's office trying to coordinate the housing recovery portion. To Felicia's question about planning, it is true what Ed says, that it is difficult to have a plan that perfectly fits the disaster or catastrophe that you're dealing with. But having something that you know is a plan from which you will deviate is a better starting point when something bad happens than having nothing at all. And having taken the time with your teams to do exercises, just like, you know, as kids, all of us in school, you know, had to do the fire drills, right, to know which corner of the neighborhood we had to go to and which stairwell you would go down. Understanding that plan and what you were intending to do, and simple things as simple as, you know, personally. So, and when I was the Senior Advisor to Secretary Donovan, if something bad happened that the federal government had to be engaged in, called, and people were going to bunkers and all that type of stuff, I was one of the people who had to go. My wife, at the end of my time there, we had a 3-year-old, 1-year-old, and a newborn. And my wife would have to leave with them by herself. And so we talked about, we had bags that were packed, just stayed in the closet, that had most of what we need. We had cash that was set aside, and we had people identified. If the bad thing happened north, where she would go south. If the bad thing happened south, where she would go north. And so those types of things are important. We're going to get into a little later just simple things like phone trees, group me, groups, text exercise, text list to get to your folks, and almost all the way down to smoke signals, how you can reach folks if you have to, right? And so it is vitally important that at least have something that structures your response, and then know if you have to deviate from it, what the deviations are, and everyone understands those collectively as an organization.
And kind of add on that a little bit as we talk about partnerships. Like for myself, I've got a couple big bridges and a river between my house and my office. So in a major event, I've worked out with my local county, EM in Thurston County, that I go there. And my bosses know that. So that's kind of the thing too. There are other city, state, federal, or partners that you can have. And so specifically if you don't live like right close to where you need to be for work or where your work is, but you need to be able to support, is there a location you can go to? That may be a safe place for you as well, and for that employee, they can go and they can operate, maybe help that local jurisdiction with some of the stuff, get after the work you need them to do as well. So that's another kind of a partnership, is having a plan and having different locations that you have agreements, or just sometimes it can be a handshake deal, sometimes it's more formal if it's needed. Say, hey, if something bad happens, come to my building. And open up your buildings as well. Hey, something else happened, come to my building if you need your staff need a place to work or be safe. It's a great partnership building there.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, so I'm new to public housing emergency management, well versed in emergency management field, so pardon me if this is just ignorant, but from my understanding, HUD can provide funding to eventually replace the built housing, which takes years and years and years, right?
Correct.
There's grants, there's government regulations. State emergency management's going to provide assistance as they get it. At the end of the day, the local jurisdiction's primary responsible for this is primary responsible for the recovery. We as housing entities might be able to partner with other agencies to assist with that process and that recovery. At the end of the day, local jurisdiction's calling the shot. And by local jurisdiction, I mean local city, county, town, where it is.
Correct.
Yeah, Brittany, say your.
Yep.
Give.
I know. I love my phrase, but I think we'll definitely get into more when we talk about response and we talk recovery. But some of the things that we'll get into when we're talking about, say, at the county level and the city level, is knowing not just your county EM and your city EM, if there is one, but knowing who your local partners are, your nonprofits. So we talk a lot about VOADs and COADs. Here we go with the acronyms, Joel, but you know those. And so it's the voluntary organizations active in disaster, or community organizations active in disaster. And so we'll get in more to that, more specifics and examples. But that's a lot of why, like, developing those relationships now, you are going to reap the benefits if there were to be any type of event. I'm actually going to break it here before we get into planning and exercises, both with Ed and Joel, just so we can take a breather. We can stand up, we can re-energize.